I'm joined by current head LSU baseball coach and former privateer, Paul Mainieri. And Coach, first of all, kind of wanted to start at the beginning with this. Obviously, those who know you know how much of an influence your father was at first on your coaching career. And just kind of talk about those early days growing up and how that impacted you as you would go on to carve out your own path.
Well, I grew up in Miami, Florida, where my father was the original baseball coach at Miami-Dade Community College, and he developed them into a national power. They won the national championship in his fourth year there in 1964. But when he retired from coaching, he was generally regarded as the greatest junior college coach in history. He was the first coach to 1,000 career wins. And besides the one national championship, I think he had 5 second and third place finishes. And I think he had about 35 former players make it to the major leagues. So as you can imagine, I grew up in a pretty intense baseball environment. And when just a young little boy, 4 or 5 years old, all I ever wanted to do was be with my father in the dugout. And so it was pretty natural that I kind of followed his footsteps. And besides loving sports as an athlete, but I knew I wanted to become a coach. I probably figured out about when I was 14 or 15 years old that I wanted to become a coach. If I couldn't play in the major leagues, being a college coach was my dream.
And it's just kind of go back to that. Is there a moment kind of in particular in your youth that you can recall that was kind of that kind of moment that you knew, or was it just kind of gradual over time, or like you said, just kind of instilled from a young age?
Yeah, it was from a young age. I just couldn't even imagine life without sports. I was always in the backyard throwing a football or hitting a baseball or fielding ground balls. And I watched every game, all the sports on television. Back then, it's hard for you to imagine this, but we only had 3 TV stations back then. So whenever there was a sporting event, I was glued to the TV. And I just always, loved athletics. I loved competition. And I loved being around my father. My father was an amazing man and taught me basically everything that I knew. He guided me not only as a wonderful father, but as somebody in the profession of sports. And I watched the interaction that he had with players. And it just was something that over the course of time, I just saw the way my dad was impacting young people's lives. And I just felt it was what I wanted to do. And fortunately, I got to watch a lot of great ball players while I was growing up. You're kind of young, but players like Bucky Dent, who became the shortstop of the New York Yankees, and Mickey Rivers, who played center field for the New York Yankees, Warren Cromartie, all these really outstanding ball players that ended up playing in the major leagues were the players that I grew up watching as a young boy. And so, I don't know what else I would do with life if I wasn't in coaching. So, I owe that all to my father.
And kind of fast forward to your college days. And of course, you spent 2 years here at the University of New Orleans. First of all, just kind of talk an overview about what the college experience was like for you on the lakefront.
Well, first, let me say this, Emmanuel, that growing up as my father's son, he was my idol. He was everything. And I emulated everything that he did in my coaching later on. But I had this great desire to meet somebody else that could be a mentor for me besides my own father. I first started at LSU when I was a freshman. I only stayed 1 year because really at LSU at that time, baseball was not emphasized very much. In fact, the head baseball coach, his main job was he was the equipment manager for the football team. And so he wasn't even out there during fall practice. And at that time, it was known as LSUNO. They were Division II. They actually had a much better team than we had at LSU. I left after my freshman year at LSU to go play for my father in junior college. My heartstrings were tugging on me to have that experience as well. But then when I finished playing for my dad, I knew this was going to be my last chance to find a coach that I could really learn from. And that was the most important thing for me as I was trying to decide on a new school. And I made a few other visits. I had visited South Carolina and Florida and a couple other schools. But when I came to New Orleans to visit my girlfriend at the time, I went out to the lakefront. It was prearranged. I went out to the lakefront and I met Ron Maestri. And I'm telling you, after meeting him for 10 minutes, I knew that this was the guy that I had been looking my whole life for. besides my dad, I wanted to have that one coach that I could really learn from. And 10 minutes after talking to Ron Maestri, I looked up at the heavens and I said, thank you, God, for bringing this guy into my life. And so there was no question that that was who I wanted to play for. And that was the big attraction for me. Little did I know that there was going to be other great things when I got to UNO. I mean, my teammates were unbelievable. The best teammates you could ever ask for. To this day, they're still my best friends in the world. We had a little bit of a chip on our shoulder because we were actually LSUNO became UNO in the year that I was down at playing for my father, and they transferred into Division One. And they had, I think, in '74 or so, they had gone to the Division Two World Series. But by the time I came to UNO, they were Division One, and we were kind of the new kid on the block, and we had to really prove ourselves. And so our players kind of took the personality of our coach, Ron Maestri, and we were a bunch of battlers, man. We were fighting like crazy to gain respect, and I think we did it. The 2 years that I spent at UNO playing for Ron, playing with those teammates that I had, like George Perez and Manny Coletti and Jimmy Kropog and Kevin McGann, John Shivey, Randy Bush came in my last year, Leroy Weimer, and playing for Mace, and Tom Schwanner joined the staff as an assistant coach. I couldn't have asked for a better situation. Our junior year, we won the first ever Sun Belt Conference championship, but it did not bring with it an automatic bid into the NCAA tournament because it was a new conference. I think we were 35-16 that year, and we felt like we really deserved a bid, but we didn't get it. But then my senior year, I mean, we left no doubt. I think our final record was 49-14, but we won the Sun Belt Conference again, and really just snowplowed our way through the season. And the only disappointment in this season was we lost in the regional at Mississippi State, and we honestly felt we had the best team. We beat Mississippi State in the first game, but then had just an unbelievably unfortunate loss to Murray State in the winners bracket game. We lost 16-15. We had 22 hits, didn't make an error, and still lost the ball game. And then we ended up losing a really close game to Mississippi State and got eliminated. So that was the only thing that was sour about the entire time I was there for 2 years was the way it ended, because we really felt we were going to end our season in Omaha.
I can tell you this, Coach, as someone who has heard from so many people about the history of this program. I often hear about the 78 and 79 teams, and I could tell you some people have called them the best in program history, and that's certainly a great debate for another day. But kind of just talk about a little bit more about the team. You mentioned the atmosphere, but beyond, obviously, it was a very talented team. But what are some things that maybe people don't know that contributed to the success, like some of the intangibles of this team that really contributed to success?
When I mentioned before that I wanted to learn from Ron Maestri, and I learned an awful lot of things. First of all, my first year here at UNO, we were on the old field, which was over there next to Bienville Hall. There's a building there now, and it wasn't a real nice field, but Mace taught us all the lesson of hard work and to take pride in our field. I mean, we were the ones that did the work on the field every day. And then Mace would go out into the community and he'd hustle like crazy to garner support from the community for the UNO baseball program, which he was very successful in doing. All you have to do is spend 10 minutes with Ron Maestri and the charisma that he has. And he was able to get people from the city to support the program. And you could just feel that the program was ascending, we were getting better all the time. And then another thing that I learned from him, when you looked at our starting lineup, okay, Kevin McGann at third base was a high school shortstop. Of course, Manny Coletti, our shortstop, was a high school shortstop. I played second base. I was a high school shortstop. John Shivey played first base. He was a high school shortstop. Matt Mock played in the outfield. He was a high school shortstop. You getting the drift what I'm talking about? Mike Quaddy was our center fielder. He was a high school shortstop. So one day I asked Mace about that, and he said, well, in high school, the best athletes generally play shortstop. So he wanted to get the best athletes, and then he could move them around to different positions. And so that's why we had a lot of guys that took pride in their defense. We probably had the best defensive team in the entire country. We all could run pretty well. Most guys could handle the bat pretty well, and there were some guys with some power. I like to brag about a couple of things about my career at UNO. I was the worst player on a really good team. I tell everybody that Ron Maestri put me in the NCAA record book, most consecutive games batting ninth in the order. But I would much rather be the worst player on a really good team than the best player on a bad team.
It's fun. Obviously, we've heard interviews with you and Coach Mace, and y'all have a lot of fun with that. But seriously, you mentioned about obviously his impact and effect on you as well. And one of the things that you mentioned also is that he pushed his players, but he also garnered the respect of his players. And you knew that he was going to go to battle with you, and you knew that he was going to do the most for you as well.
I could relate to that so much because that's the way my father was when he coached at Miami-Dade. And Mace, he could get under your skin sometimes. Now he challenged you. He was tough. I mean, he was tough. You had to be a tough guy to be able to play for Mace. There were easier coaches to play for than him, that's for sure. But I loved it because you knew he always had your back. Off the field, he'd do anything for you, and you felt like he was your friend more than he was even your coach, because you knew he genuinely cared about you as a person. But as on the field, man, he wanted to win bad, and he pushed his players, and we wanted to win bad. And the cohesiveness of our team, sometimes it was because we were all mad at Mace, and I think he used to do that intentionally sometimes, but most of the time it was because we loved Mace and we wanted to win for him. I'll tell you, he such an important part of my life, Emmanuel. I don't know that I've ever gone a month in my life from the day I left UNO that I haven't talked to Mace at least one time during the month. And when I was the coach at the University of New Orleans, when I was coach at the University of Notre Dame, I'll never forget this. The best team that I'd ever had was in 2001, and we lost in the regional championship game. And we thought for sure we were going to go to Omaha. Now, Notre Dame had not been to Omaha for 45 years, but we felt that that team was good enough to get to Omaha, and we got upset in the finals of the regional championship. And a couple days later, I'm driving home after saying goodbye to the players, and I'm really down in the dumps, and I'll never forget it. I'm pulling into my driveway, and my cell phone rings, and I barely have enough energy to pick up the phone, but I see it's Mace calling. And so I answer it. And he doesn't even say hello. He doesn't even say who it is. He immediately just goes into telling me, listen to me. He says, it's going to happen for you, but it's going to happen when you least expect it. He said, that's what happened to me. He said, in 79, we had the best team I ever had. We were going to go to Omaha. We were going to win the national championship. And when we lost at Mississippi State, I was as low as I could be. But in 84, when really nobody expected us to, we ended up going to Omaha. And he said, that's what's going to happen for you. Well, a year later, with an all-freshman pitching staff, we ended up going to Omaha the next year. And those words that Mace gave me that day when I was pulling into my driveway a year earlier did so much to keep my chin up and keep me thinking positive that it was still possible and that we would accomplish our goal. So that was in 2001, 2002, after I hadn't played for Mace in almost 30 years, and he's still giving me advice like that, helping me through my life.
There were certainly, obviously, no shortages of great moments, and even just that 2-year span at UNO. But what are some memories that stand out from your days at UNO? Maybe kind of a memorable game or a memorable story from those times.
Oh man, we had a lot of them. I'll never forget the very first game we played in the new, at that time it was new Privateer Park. Now, of course, it's Ron Maestri Field or Ron Maestri Stadium. But the very first game we played against Oklahoma, and we were literally hanging signs on the outfield fence that morning to get the field ready to play the game that day. And we had heard about Oklahoma had this really good pitcher that threw in the 90s. Back then, it was very rare to have pitchers that threw in the 90s. And so we were really geared up. It was going to be opening day, brand new ballpark, playing a great team with a great pitcher. And man, we had so many people at the game. People were everywhere. They were just all over the place. And I remember in the 10th inning, we were tied. I led off the inning with a double to the right center field. And then Manny Coletti walked, and then Mike Quaddy got a base hit to drive me home, and I scored the winning run in the first game ever in our new ballpark, and that was a thrill for me personally. But the games when we played Tulane were unbelievable, Emmanuel. There was no way the seating capacity could hold all the people that wanted to go to the games. So whenever we would play them, fans would literally be sitting on the field right up to the baseline in foul territory. Sometimes we had fans even sitting on the warning track in play area. We would have crowds of like 6,000 people when we played Tulane, which was unheard of back in those days in college baseball. And we always had great games at those. But the biggest thorn in my side from my 2 years at UNO is we never beat Tulane. We lost to them 5 times in the 2 years. And every one of them was a great game. We lost 1-0. We lost 16-15. But they were, they had a very good team as well, of course. And the games were so exciting. And it was I just remember standing out there at second base, looking at all the people that were at the game and just thinking to myself, this is like the coolest thing a kid could ever go through in college baseball.
I can tell you, going back through old media guides and seeing some of the pictures of some of the crowds, it's really, it must have been obviously really something. You talked about the atmosphere and how energetic and intense it was, but kind of wanted to shift toward you and your coaching career. Obviously, you go on from UNO. You start out as a head coach with St. Thomas, of course, Air Force, Notre Dame, and now currently at LSU. But just talk about kind of some of the biggest rewards and the biggest lessons as well that you've learned as your journey as a coach has continued through
Well,
all those
I've
years.
just been the luckiest guy in the world, Emmanuel, with my opportunities that I've had. When I was actually an assistant coach in high school after I'd been released from professional baseball, I signed with the White Sox as a senior sign, 26th round. And when I got released in spring training, I went to my alma mater, Christopher Columbus Catholic High School for Boys in Miami, and I was an assistant coach for my very dear friend Jim Hendry, who later on became the general manager of the Chicago Cubs. When Jim left after 3 years, I thought that they would promote me to be the head coach, but the school was run by a religious order, and one of the brothers of the religious order wanted to be the head coach, so I think they felt an obligation to make him the coach. But here I was at 24 years old, disappointed that I wasn't made the head coach, so I was pretty upset about it. But there was a small school in Miami. It was called Biscayne College at the time. It's now called St. Thomas University. But they were looking for a coach, and it was a part-time position, paid $3,000 a year. And I was able to convince the athletic director to hire me, an unproven young man, in his mid-20s. And that was a great break for me. I ended up being the coach there for 6 years. It became a full-time job in my second year. And then after I was just 30 years old when the United States Air Force Academy decided to civilianize their head coaching position. They had always had an officer act as the head baseball coach, but they decided to hire somebody that was in the profession, on a full-time basis. And I was very fortunate to get the job. So I'm very proud that I was the very first civilian baseball coach at the Air Force Academy. And that was an amazing experience. And I felt a huge responsibility because these young men at the time were going to go on to be officers in the Air Force. They were going to become pilots and be the custodians of our way of life. And I felt a huge responsibility to help teach them how to compete and be successful and use qualities like poise under pressure and composure and have the competitive zeal and all those kinds of things that allow you to be a successful athlete that then would transfer into the cockpit. When they were in battle, on a baseball field, somebody wins and somebody loses, but in war, there's no option but to win. And I'm very proud of the fact that I sit here today, probably the only coach in America that has as former players 4 general officers in the Air Force and about 25 full colonels. So I really loved my time there at the Air Force Academy. And I thought I'd spend the rest of my career there, quite honestly. And then out of the clear blue, I was 37 years old. I got a phone call one day from the athletic director at the University of Notre Dame. And, the University of Notre Dame means our mother. And when they offered me the job, I thought to myself, I really do want to go to heaven someday. And I was a little afraid that if you say no to Jesus's mother's school, you might not get in on the first class. So I really felt there was no option. I had to take the job. And I spent 12 wonderful years there. I loved every second of it. As mentioned, we went to Omaha one year, and we got bids, I think, in 9 of my 12 years there. And, everything was going great. And I actually had some interest from some other schools. I probably could have been the coach at 6 or 7 other schools down in the South, in the SEC and Big 12 and so forth. But I didn't want to leave Notre Dame. And then all of a sudden you get that one phone call, that the one school for which you'd consider leaving. And that was, of course, was LSU. And so I've always taught my players that when they when they go on that field, no matter who they're playing, you can't be afraid. You got to let it rip. If you're going to lose, go down swinging, go down fighting, but you got to believe in yourself and can't be afraid. Well, when I got offered the LSU job, I kind of looked in the mirror and I thought, I've been teaching my players these things all these years. Maybe I need to apply them to my own life too. And so I decided to take a leap of faith and take the LSU job. As everybody knows, it's a pressure-packed job, but I wanted to do it because I wanted to challenge myself and see how good I could be at it. And fortunately, my second year here, we went to Omaha. My third year here, we won the College World Series, and we've been back to Omaha three more times. We've had some really good teams that were capable of winning it. We just came up a little bit short. So hopefully there's another championship out there before I finish my career.
You mentioned about continuing what's been a traditionally strong program at LSU and making it to the top of the national title in 2009. But I wanted to ask you about that 2008 run. I was a student at UNO, and I was following college baseball a lot at that time. And for those that don't remember, you guys ripped off, I believe it was a 23-game winning streak. But kind of take the folks back to the midst of that streak and what it was like as a coach, just kind of seeing a team like that. You mentioned about some of the great teams you've had, but seeing a team like that just take it to another level.
Well, we're here about a year and 2/3 by that point. Okay, my first year we went 29-26, which was understandable. You get a hall pass your first year, but the second year we were 40 games into the season and we were 23-16-1, 6-11-1 in conference play, with 4 weeks to go in the regular season. And I think there were a lot of people that were kind of calling for my head, to be honest with you. And I'll never forget, we went to play at Tulane on a Tuesday night, and we rallied late in the game to win the game. And I remember grouping the guys up after the ball game and talking to them and saying, look, we've been a pitch short and a bat short, a play short all year. We're on the verge of doing something great. And I think tonight is going to start us on a roll. Well, little did I know that we would win 23 games in a row. That was the first game of the 23-game winning streak. So we swept our last 4 SEC series and won all our midweek games. And then we went to the SEC tournament and swept through it. So we went into the NCAA tournament with a 20-game winning streak. We swept through the regional, and then the super regional was going to be the very last games at old Alec Box Stadium. We were moving on to the new field the following year. And we had Cal Irvine come in. And in the first game, they pulled a hidden ball trick on us with the bases loaded when we were in the midst of a rally. And the umpire never saw the guy tag our runner, and our runner was safe. It was DJ LeMahieu was the runner. And the video shows that he was clearly safe, but the umpire called him out to end the inning. So we ended up losing the first game of the Super Regional. And then in the second game, which is the elimination game, this could be the last game of the season. It could be the last game of the old Alec Box Stadium. We were losing by 5 runs in the 8th inning, and we were the visiting team. We scored 2 in the 8th and 5 in the 9th. and we ended up holding them off in the bottom of the ninth, and we won that game to force a deciding final game. And we ended up hitting 7 home runs and beat them 21-7 in the championship game. So we really sent the old box out in the most appropriate way. And even though we didn't win the national championship out in Omaha, we kind of set this tone for the next year. And the next year, we started the season preseason number 1 in the country and ended up winning the national championship. And that was in the first year of the new box. So that was a pretty special time in my life, that 2-year period.
And one of the guys who coached, of course, that you coached around that period is current privateer head coach Blake Dean, who certainly you talk to everybody that mentions about how great of a player and how great of a hitter he was. It's such a prestigious program. But kind of 2 words that I think stick out to me and being able to work with Coach Dean now are energy and preparation. And just wanted to talk about, obviously, and ask you from your vantage point what you saw in the development of Coach Dean as a player, and then his transition to a head coach where he currently is now.
Well, obviously, Blake is a very special person to me in my life, and we'll be very close, till the day we die. Blake, I inherited Blake as a freshman. My first year was his first year at LSU, so I did not recruit him, but I'm sure glad the previous coach did. He actually came to LSU as a pitcher, more of a pitcher than a hitter, but he ended up having a shoulder injury. I think he had a torn labrum in his shoulder and was never able to pitch for us. So we had him hit, and I was just in love with his swing right from the first day I ever saw him swing a bat. He was the 3-hole hitter on opening day as a freshman. He actually hit a 3-run homer in his first career at bat. We won the ball game 4-3, and he had a 3-run homer. So he was the big hero in the first game he ever played, and his whole career was that way. You talk about his sophomore year was the second year, 2008. That 23-game winning streak that you talked about earlier, I've never seen a hitter be more clutch and carry a team on his back than Blake Dean. Out of those 23 wins, he was probably directly responsible for half of them. I'm talking about with walk-off home runs, the most clutch hits, the most clutch home runs that you can imagine. He was just an amazing, amazing player. And then, of course, his junior year, we won the national championship. And he could have signed after his junior year. He decided to come back and complete his career at LSU before going into professional baseball. And then when he had not finished his degree, however, and so he went into pro ball, and he really, like me, he didn't really like professional baseball. He liked the team concept much more than the individual aspect of it. And I remember him calling me one off season after first or second year of playing pro ball, and he said, Coach, I don't think I want to go back and play anymore. And I said, Blake, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. I think you need to give it one more chance. Get yourself prepared for spring training. Go to spring training, and if you're in the midst of spring training and you're just not loving it, then you can make that decision then. But you got to give it one more chance. So he did. He listened to me, and he did. And he called me about 3 weeks into spring training, and he said, Coach, I'm really miserable. I really don't want to play anymore. I think I'm gonna retire. And I said, well, you go in there and tell that farm director that you've decided to retire, and thank him for the opportunity that he gave to you. And I said, and then you get your butt back to Baton Rouge and get back in school and come and help me as an undergraduate coach, and you finish your degree. And so that's what he did. The following fall, he came back to LSU. He finished his degree, but he also was my undergraduate coach, which you're allowed to have if they've exhausted their eligibility but haven't graduated. So that gave Blake his first taste of coaching, and he really contributed a lot to our team that year. And so the next year was the year when Ron Maestri took over for his second tour of duty. And so when I talked to Mace about it, and we were talking about him putting together his coaching staff, and I said, Mace, I've got a perfect kid for you to be your volunteer. He'll drag the field, he'll cut the grass, he'll do whatever you ask him to do. And of course, I recommended Blake. Well, then Blake made a great impression on Mace. And then a year later, Mace put him on full time. And then when Mace retired for the second time, they promoted Blake to being the head coach. So I feel very good about my involvement with helping him get started in his coaching career as well. And I'm just so proud of him now. I think he's doing a remarkable job at my alma mater. And besides being somebody that's very dear to me in my life as my former player, I'm just so happy for Blake, and I think he'll continue to do a great job.
And as we close here, Coach, just kind of nice, wanted to ask you one more question. Just kind of talk about the dynamic of that relationship now between yourself and Coach Dean and Coach Maestri. Of course, now you mentioned, of course, with Coach Mace coming back, you got a chance to coach against him, and of course with Coach Dean now. But just kind of talk about the dynamic of that relationship and how it's evolved as all three of you have impacted each other's careers.
Well, I really don't like coaching against UNO because I root for UNO in every game that they play, except for the one that we have to play them in, and obviously I have a job to do, and Blake, of course, respects that, as well as Mace from when he coached. I had to coach against him for a couple of years. I think UNO can be great again. I think they're on the right path. There's so much history and tradition in the program. Before the 2 years I was there, 78 and 79, they were great. The years after I was out of there, they were great. And then, of course, everybody knows, there's been some issues through the years financially, and it's had an impact on the program. But I think that Mace started him back on the right track, and I think Blake has taken the baton now, and he's doing a great job as well. But, Ron Maestri will always be like my second father. I still lean on him for advice. I talk to him several times a month now, so now that I'm back in Louisiana. And then Blake is forever calling and asking for advice about things. I'll email him a document that I would use with my team, and he would use it as a template to try to do things with UNO's team. And Blake knows I'm always here for him, and during the fall, we play a couple of times, we kind of, evaluate each other's teams for each other, we maybe something that we don't see, Blake will tell me, or vice versa. And then, of course, when we play in the spring, we're playing for real. We both are trying to win the game very badly. But, Blake just lost his father a couple weeks ago. And, I remember his father very well. Mike is a wonderful man. And I know it's going to be a tremendous void in Blake's life, as I lost my father a year ago. So I know, what he's going through, although Blake's father died more suddenly than my father. My father lived a full life up to 90. So, it's going to be hard for Blake going forward, but he'll find the strength to do it. And I think he's a great molder of men, and I think he's going to continue to do a great job there.
Absolutely, and wanted to echo what you said, Coach. And certainly, we're keeping Coach Dean and his family in our thoughts and prayers as well. And Coach Mainieri, wanted to thank you very much for joining us today. It was a great pleasure.
All right, Emmanuel. Great to be with you. Go Privateers and Tigers.